Hey guys, welcome back to Car Culture TV, or as we like to call it, CCTV. I'm Aryan,
I'm Audit.
and in this week's episode, we have a special guest here. Nishant, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Nishant. I've been into cars ever since I was little. I love loud cars, and I'm very much a gasoline purist. Personally, I drive a Genesis Coupe, 6-speed manual, and in the past, I've been very much into working on my cars. My previous car was a Toyota Corolla 2006, and although it wasn't much, I like to work on it and turn it into my own creation.
That's awesome.
So, in this week's episode, as usual, we'll be covering the weekly news in the car culture world in Speed Trap. And then we'll be moving on to a brand new segment we like to call Fast and Curious. We'll be giving you guys some advice about car buying, car ownership, you name it, anything about cars. We got it. Now let's get into Speed Trap. So, our first bit of news here, the Genesis G70. I mean, it's been one of the revolutionary cars that the new Genesis brand has had out there. It's a sporty car, it's a luxury car, it has a lot to offer. But I think one of the main reasons a lot of people were interested by the car is that it offered a manual transmission, which you wouldn't necessarily expect for like a Hyundai like premium car to have necessarily, because I mean most luxury cars aren't necessarily manuals. But this car was offered the manual transmission. Well, unfortunately, that one specific thing has just been discontinued from the Genesis G70.
Yeah, and honestly, I'm not really surprised, right? So, as a lot of you guys know, the Genesis G70 is really sharing the exact same chassis as a Kia Stinger. These companies are basically sister companies. Hyundai owns a controlling stake in Kia, and so Alfred Bierman, the head of the M division at BMW that then came and designed the Stinger, also had a huge impact on making the G70. So besides having a slightly shorter wheelbase, this car has a lot of the same internals, both the same engine options in terms of a 4-cylinder with 255 horsepower and a 6-cylinder with 365, and obviously, it's going to be a little bit pricier because it's Genesis, so it's Hyundai's premier, expensive brand. So with their 4-cylinder model, in actually their base version, they had offered a 6-speed manual. It had mixed reviews, and honestly, for me, I think the reason they're discontinuing it is because it probably just didn't sell that much.
Exactly. Their primary reason for discontinuing the manuals that had terrible sales. And when you think about the Genesis market, I don't think many of them being like older people who are like luxury focused, they're not looking for a manual sports car. And especially because it only came with the inline 4, I don't think many people were excited to have it. But Nishant, you drive a manual every day. What are your thoughts on the car like losing its manual transmission?
Right, obviously it makes me sad to see another manual go, but this has been a trend for decades, and everyone is shifting towards more effortless driving, more automatics, and manuals just don't have a purpose anymore. So, I mean, I think this was bound to come anyway, and I mean, I love the fact that Genesis did have a manual in their car, but I think it's time for it to go out.
Yeah, we really are slowly losing all the manual transmissions in the market. I mean, most manual cars are either getting discontinued as a whole, and the options are getting discontinued as a whole.
Right.
We still have a few cars introduced. We'll touch on one specific car that has reintroduced a manual later on. But I mean, yeah, it's really is a dying industry.
And that's the thing. I think they were trying to do something here by giving the manual. I think it had worse gas mileage, ironically. But the issue was it was not a very good manual in that even the people that drove it complained a lot about a really tough clutch, and they actually ended up saying I'm a manual lover, but I prefer the automatic 4-cylinder just because this manual is a pain. And that's the thing. If you look at the general buyer for a Genesis, right, if they're looking for a sporty coupe kind of fastback design or whatever, they don't want to be sitting there rowing their own gears, because at the end of the day, this car is a luxury car. And while manual driving makes you feel really connected to the vehicle, a luxury person is there for the automatic steering and the automatic cruise and the heated seats, right? They couldn't care less about rowing their own gears. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why it probably had really low sales. I think actually if they had put this manual in the Stinger, which has a lot more of, I don't want to say low-end market, but an entry-level market in terms of the accessibility to the car, it would have been so much more successful in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that it would have been really successful if it's on Stinger. So my question to both of you guys, so now that this car's manual transmission is getting discontinued, do you think that it'll be like a collector's car that people will go after in later on in the future like the Supra has been?
I mean, possibly, but overall, I don't think Genesis really has that reputation of becoming a collector's car. They haven't been around for a long time. So I don't necessarily think that they could become a collector's car, but maybe in the future we don't know.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Nishant on that one. I think like the reason that this car got discontinued is not because it wasn't like something that everyone wanted, right? It was because no one was buying it because the manual was bad and because they gave them other options besides a manual. A lot of the other collectors cars out there, let's look at like the old Mark IV Supra for example. It only came in a manual.
Yeah.
And that's why everyone was like, "Oh my god, yes," because it's an old car, it's retro, and it gives you that manual feel which everyone loves instead of like the slush boxes that a lot of the older automatic cars used to be. And so no, I don't see this being a collector's car because one, it's not a low end like market, and also because that manual wasn't that great to begin with.
Exactly.
Also, when you look at Genesis as a brand, it is a luxury brand, not necessarily a enthusiast brand.
Right.
So
Yeah, I guess that's completely true. They are making a new version of the Genesis Coupe, Nishant, your car, that they discontinued in 2016 because Genesis became its own brand. So I guess maybe we can hope that they might bring it back on that Genesis Coupe, but I mean, look, the whole point of them getting rid of it on here means that they're probably not going to put in the time and money to develop another manual car if this one failed so badly.
What I see happening more likely is them borrowing the new dual clutch transmission that the Hyundai series has, like the new Kona that's coming out. The Veloster also has the TCT that's coming out, the 10-speed dual clutch. And so that is probably more likely to end up on a Genesis Coupe. I think they learned their lesson in terms of a manual. It just wasn't that great. It wasn't that hot. And there's no point in them spending all this R&D money trying to reinvent the wheel or figure out a good manual. Because unless they're going to partner with someone like ZF to get a really good manual transmission, it's really not worth putting it in their next car. It's better to just go dual clutch.
Exactly. So our next bit of news here, the Ford Mach-E. I mean, this car rushed onto the scene. It was revealed a few months ago, and it was like it's Ford's first big move in the electric car world. It's a crossover. It's essentially, it's supposed to be a Mustang crossover base, and I think it has a lot of potential, a lot of promise. It's supposed to be a Tesla Model Y competitor. It's a really, really interesting car, and I think it's a good direction for Ford to go in. Like ushering the electric era with a Mustang is honestly, it's a statement saying that we're committed to this, and even our like most iconic cars, we're going to start shifting over to electric stuff. So anyways, this car was released. They'll start deliveries hopefully by the end of this year, but recently they made a new version of this car. I believe that it's a one-off. I wouldn't expect to be able to buy this anytime soon, but it is a 1,400 horsepower, like drifting and performance-based Mach-E with 7 electric motors, which that doesn't make any sense how there's 7. There's 4 wheels on a car, and even if you put 2 in the back and 2 in the front, or whatever combination, I don't know how they got an odd number of electric motors, but it's absolutely insane. But is it really something that an electric SUV should be doing?
So I don't know. I think, so interestingly, we saw this Mach-E racing concept come out, right? Elon Musk goes on Twitter, as he always does, to basically announce anything, whether he's messing with his own stocks or it's a new update on a Tesla. And he said that the Model Y, which already has an off-road mode, is actually also going to get the track mode that's been really popular on the Model 3. So it's very possible that they're just trying to enter this kind of competition going back and forth of who can make a faster, more aggressive car. Because the whole stigma that they're trying to break at the end of the day, Ford and Tesla, is that electric cars can be cool and that they can be fast and sporty and aren't those like wimpy Priuses that people normally associate any electric technology with. And Tesla's obviously come a long way in changing that stereotype, but putting out a car like this shows to the regular like world that, hey, we're Ford, we make really cool performance cars. This is our first shot at an electric car, but watch what we can do with performance on our electric car, because I think what they're doing is readying the public for a sports Mustang that's electric.
Yeah, like I completely get that, right? They're gonna want to make an electric Mustang at some point that's like a full-out sedan that's super sporty. But the thing is, I mean, I don't know if it was necessarily worth it to make this crazy one-off vehicle when no person that buys a Mach-E is going to do this. I mean, they said that it was to show off the capabilities of their chassis, right? Because when you consider internals, the Mach-E shares nothing. Besides, like, I guess the same type of electric motor, but not even the same power output at all.
Right.
So it just doesn't make sense why they would try to make this as a car instead of making like a one-off electric Mustang, which they have concepts of. There's concepts of like the current Mustang retrofitted with electric motors that Ford themselves has released. So it doesn't make sense why they did it to the Mach-E.
What do you think, Nishant?
I think what you said about breaking the stereotype in electric cars, making them seem cool
Yeah.
or fast or sporty, I think that's very true. I think all these brands are trying to do the same thing, which is what I think they were doing with this car. But I believe that Mustang would have been more successful rather than taking the Mustang and going into electric with the Mustang. Like the Mustang has always been known as the supercharged V8 or
Yeah.
a big V8, you know,
Right.
and loud. Making that electric, I don't know if that's necessarily holding that brand well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really is just to force people into a transition. But honestly, yeah, even when they called this car the Mustang Mach-E, so many people raged because they're like, you can't do this with the Mustang brand. Like, Mustangs are raw power. They're American muscle. You can't make a Mustang electric. And I
Right.
mean, yeah, they're really upset. But I don't think this was gonna make them any happier.
Yeah,
honestly, when you
that's
consider
true.
the crowd.
That's true. I don't know. For some reason, I look at this car and I just think like Ken Block was all over this thing. Like he was probably like, because there's videos of him test driving the Mach-E when it first came out, like the regular version, and he was like, "Ooh, can I hoon it? Can I drift it around the track?" And like you could just see all the Ford engineers like, "Please, please, please, no, 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 no. This is a prototype. Please take care of it." And he's like, "All right, but you guys have to make me a cool sport one." So maybe this is Ford just kind of flexing their R&D budget, which is enormous compared to a company like Tesla. And it's like, well, if we can, why not? You know, it's one of those classic memes of like, you didn't ask whether you should, you only asked if you could, and that's what happened. And I think that's what the Mach-E is.
So our next bit of news here, the Ford Bronco. We talked about it when there were leaked images beforehand. Well, now we have the real car. It has unveiled all the pricing, all the specs, all the options. It's finally out. So they have a standard Bronco, and you can get that in a two-door and a four-door, and then they have a Bronco Sport, which we'll touch a little bit on later. And the top of the line, like the first edition Ford Bronco, has already sold out completely. And it's because I think there was a lot of hype behind this car. People were really excited to finally see it. And I think that this is exactly what people wanted when they wanted the Bronco to come back. And as you can see, even in these pictures, they really emphasized off-road capability, right?
Yeah, it looks like a Jeep competitor through and through. I mean,
Completely.
the whole then the Bronco really was like when it first came out, and it's cool that Ford is coming back and entering that scene because the Bronco was very successful, and a lot of the older ones are collectibles now. They're worth lots of money, and so it's exciting to see that Ford has brought it back. And unlike Toyota did with the Supra, it's not like a completely different car just with the same name, right? Like they've held true to the Bronco brand and what the Bronco was. A funny thing that I think about it is like, so Goodyear makes the tires for the Bronco,
Yeah.
right? And Ford has a special agreement with Goodyear to make these tires, and they're only for the Bronco, so they're designed for the car, the right size, and whatever. Well, the brand of tires that Goodyear was putting on was called the Goodyear Wrangler, and Jeep loved it. Jeep was like, "This is the funniest thing ever. Your tires say Wrangler on it, so clearly we're the better car." And so Ford went back to Goodyear and said, "Please, can you take off the word Wrangler from your tires?" And Goodyear was like, "Okay, fine, since you're ordering millions of dollars worth of tires." And so that got a lot of publicity, and ironically brought up into a lot of people's minds, oh wait, this is just a Jeep but with a Ford badge on it.
I mean, I guess you can always think that it's a Jeep with a Ford badge on it, but it looks special and it has a lot of heritage behind it. And so one thing they did, that there's like a ton of different trim options, right? And on some of the trims, you can actually get a manual transmission, which I think that's honestly really cool. Nishant, I mean, you drive a manual. What are your
Right.
thoughts?
I mean, that's amazing. I think that manual should be offered in every car if it were up to me. But like you mentioned, you said all the models are sold out already. I believe that could partly be credited to how popular it was in the previous generation. And when a company discontinues a car and revives it like that, it's just going to get a lot of hype.
Right.
So,
That makes sense.
So what are your thoughts on it being like, do you think the manual transmission is better for off-roading or worse?
probably worse. I mean, riding a half clutch up a hill, it's just not the best or efficient way to do it. So
Right.
it's just about the experience to have the manual.
But like, okay, so going on beyond the manual point, one of the weirdest things I found out about this car, and I don't know if this is like, I wasn't necessarily happy about this, but pricing wise, so a two-door Bronco, the standard version, starts at about $28,500.
Okay.
Pretty high. But depending on what options you pick and whether you keep going two-door or four-door, it can ramp up to a starting price of $63,000.
Jesus.
I don't see anyone paying for that size of car for like a Jeep level car. It just seems like a lot of money for not much, like, out of it.
Right. Yeah. What it feels like to me, based on that crazy price range, is Ford was trying to basically get a little bit of everything, right?
Yeah.
They wanted to have their cake and eat it too, because what they're doing in that price range is they're competing with the mid to top of the line Jeeps, but then on the other side, they're competing with the entry level Land Rovers.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
what they're doing is like, oh, this looks a lot like a Defender that we talked about a couple weeks ago. But it also looks a lot like a Jeep. And so they're like, oh, I think we could do a little bit of both with our off-road capabilities. So let's go from all the way base level, take the doors off, Jeep pricing, to fancy leather seat luxury Defender pricing.
And I guess it worked, right? Because I mentioned earlier, the first edition is completely sold out, and that's the one that starts at $63,000.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think people are like seeing the Land Rover connection behind it, and they're okay with that. But for those of us who don't want to pay $60,000 for a Ford Bronco, they also unveiled the Bronco Sport.
It's
Now,
cute.
I mean, yeah. See, it's cute, right? But it looks Bronco-esque, and it's like your standard crossover SUV. There's no two-door option, just only the four-door option. It looks a lot like a Defender in quite a bit of ways, but
Yeah.
it's more of your like standard thing, not too crazy on the off-road side, but the price range is a lot more better. It ranges from $26K to $38K, and that's a bit more normal range for, I guess, a premium consumer SUV, right?
I get it. I totally do. And it is like a cute little dinkier version. It reminds me a lot of the Jeep Renegade. So that typical, like, actually really low ride height, like 4x4 type of platform. And that was one of the issues with the Renegade is anyone that took it off-roading knows it would just bottom out immediately because it has such a low clearance. And I don't know, it just looks cheaper. Like I see a lot of plastic on the outside, a lot of the trim is plastic, and I get that they're trying to, again, it just seems like Ford stretching themselves thin. And like while they did sell out, their first edition, those are typically people that were already hype about the car and would basically just go for it no matter what. So I'm interested to see how the sales are going to compare, because I've heard rumors that Ford might be discontinuing one of them before they even launch.
Actually, so I don't know, which one of them do you think they're going to discontinue, if any?
I think if they're going to discontinue, it's going to be this one, because if they're not getting a lot of volume on this small one and they can justify that people are willing to spend the extra money even to get the low level, like big boy Bronco, then that's what they're going to do.
But I don't know. I feel like if they're going to discontinue one, maybe the two-door? Because think about it. How many two-door SUVs do you think people are really going to want to buy? It only really reserves your off-road market, right? Wouldn't you say?
Right. And also, is it just me, or is the whole new generation just a little bit smaller than the previous generation? It just looks, like
Scaled
a compact
down.
SUV compared to the previous generation, which was a more, big actual SUV off-roading,
Yeah, I agree. Like, it's not lifted as much.
Right.
The wheelbase definitely looks shorter. I think part of that is probably like things like fuel economy and also like the market. I think a lot of people love these cute little baby crossover type SUVs.
Yeah.
But like as you mentioned, like the original Bronco is designed for off-roading, is a tank. It's meant for like, yes, I can take on the world and I sit 3 feet above everyone else. You know what I mean?
Right.
But this is like, oh, cool. This is what the new single moms want. I don't really see it.
Yeah, I mean, this is the more consumer-oriented one. It's definitely not what people are going for. It almost seems like they told the people, of like, okay, we're going to bring the Bronco back. So just give me your best designs. And they got one like consumer dinky type that like, honestly, if they only released this would have received that Toyota Supra response.
It's disappointing,
right?
yeah.
And then they found one person who made like this pure car, kind of like the Toyota FT1 concept.
Right.
And they're like, you know what? We're just going to release both of them.
Yeah.
And then we'll see how it turns out. Because honestly, it's like this one's so much more of a letdown if they were only releasing this. But then like this one here, the main Bronco is so aggressive and it's like so much better. It's really like a revival of the original Bronco.
Yeah, so I'd say personally for me, mixed reviews. Yes to the new Bronco that's actually a Bronco, and no to the Bronco that thinks it's a Bronco but is just a compact SUV.
Completely agree. So now let's get into Fast and Curious. So as I mentioned at the beginning, this is our segment where we're going to be talking about like car advice, anything from car buying to working on cars, you name it. And in the future, we'd love to answer any of your questions about cars or give you any car advice that you want to know about. So feel free to comment below any questions you have, and we'll do our best to answer them in the future episodes of the podcast. So anyways, with that being said, in today's episode of Fast and Curious, we're going to be discussing the car buying process, especially for high schoolers who are on a limited budget. So, Sean, you recently bought a Hyundai Genesis Coupe. I was heavily involved in that purchase, I'd say, in terms of car finding. But so in terms of like searching for cars, what was your main like criteria? What did you use? What helped you out?
So first, when I started out, obviously my base point before this car was a 2006 Toyota Corolla. So my expectations weren't really high for my next one, but I wanted something a little bit quicker, something a little bit louder, and a manual. Those were
Okay.
the three things I wanted. And when first looking, the first thing that popped up was a Civic Si. And for a long time, like months, I was looking for a Civic Si because it's reliable. It's been proven in the market. There's nothing wrong. You can't go wrong with the Civic
Right,
Si.
Very stable car, yeah.
Right. So that's what I was looking for. But then later on, you introduced me to the Hyundai Genesis Coupe. And originally, I didn't really like it. I was like, is it going to be reliable? Is it going to be, well built? Where like with the Civic, you can trust it. You know that it's going
Yep.
to be well built. It's going
Yeah.
to be reliable. So I dismissed it. But while looking for Civic SIs and looking at Civics on the road, I was just like, is it really unique? Is it going to stand out? A Civic is a dime a dozen. You can see one on the road every single time you drive.
Yep.
So that kind of drove me away from buying a Civic, and I started to look at a Genesis Coupe, 350Z, Mustang, Camaro, more flashier cars.
Okay.
And when looking at those three or four cars, the Genesis Coupe stood out simply because of its stock exhaust sound, its stock horsepower numbers. It makes the 3.8 makes 350 horsepower, 298 pound-feet of torque, which is an amazing number.
And what year is this car?
2014.
All right.
So, and when comparing competitors, like the V6 Mustang didn't make nearly as much horsepower, didn't have a good sound, and all the other V6 competitors is just too bland in my opinion.
Yeah.
This stood out, and if you pull up to a meet in this, people are going to ask you questions. Not many people know what it is. So yeah, that's mainly what drove me towards the Genesis Coupe.
So, I mean, you transitioned from a Toyota Corolla to a Genesis Coupe. So, a completely automatic, not amazing transmission to a raw, purist manual transmission. So, what made you necessarily like make that choice?
I've always wanted a manual car. I've liked motorcycles, which are manual. I've been driving them, and ever since I was little, like a manual car, having that involvement in the car, it really drew me to it. So yeah, that's why I really wanted a manual, and I didn't want anything else.
Yeah, I mean, a manual car is definitely a much more interesting choice, but would you recommend it for high schoolers? And who would you not recommend it for?
I mean, I wouldn't recommend it to anyone who really thinks of cars as a mode of transportation as
Okay.
From point A to point B. If you're driving a manual, it's really for the driving experience, and you're really going to be working in order to go from point A to point B.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, manual, you're going to be working harder, but it's all about the experience and, yeah, your involvement in the driving.
So let's kind of change gears a little bit, no pun intended, over to the buying process. So
Okay.
you said you came from a 2006 Corolla,
Right.
which I'm sure, that's like a lot of high schoolers have something similar. And then you started looking. What were like some of the things that your criteria that you wanted? So you mentioned like manual and you mentioned flashy, but like what about like price point? Where were you looking for these things, that kind of thing?
So, originally my price point was starting, 7, 8 grand.
Okay.
Like a little bit below 10 grand. 10 grand was the cap.
Okay.
And so when looking in that price range, a lot of 8th gen Civics came up, and that's obviously where I started because that's what fit in the price range.
Right.
But when looking at those options, they just seemed a little bit bland, and so the budget had to stretch a little bit in order to achieve a car like this or find a car like this.
Yeah.
So slowly I went to 11K, 12K, just kept going up to find the right car.
Right.
So I started looking at the Genesis Coupe, and I was like, maybe I can sacrifice the manual in order to get this. It just looks cooler.
Yeah.
And but then when I looked at it, I was like, no, I want the manual.
Okay.
So I had to filter a manual into that, and when looking at a manual Genesis Coupe, there aren't many out there.
Okay.
So then you have to keep upping your budget, right?
Right.
In order to compensate for that. And then when looking at different Genesis Coupe trims, it's a very KDM thing to have like 5 different trims for one car.
Right.
So I wanted the ultimate trim,
Of
the
course.
R-Spec trim. I had to get top of the line. So the one with the Brembo brakes, the limited slip differential, the 19-inch wheels. I wanted all that. So
Okay.
when looking at that, my budget stretched to about 14K to get this car. So yeah, Obviously,
So you basically doubled your
7, 18 to
ceiling. You went
14K.
from 7 to 14.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's worth it in the end.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you drive the car for a while, and sometimes that 7K can make a difference if you're committed to driving it at least like 6 years or so. But how far did you drive to get this car? Because I mean, locally there probably weren't many good deals.
So when looking at all my different qualifications for the car, I wanted it to be an Ultimate, I wanted it to be a 6-speed manual, and I wanted the V6, the one with 350 horsepower.
Right.
When looking at that and filtering all those things into Auto Trader, there were 2 in the whole nation. So one was in California and one was in Missouri. So I was like, okay, we're gonna hop on this Missouri one real quick.
Yeah.
And we drove 5 hours to get this car. Yeah.
And you drove a manual all the way back.
Which is your first
the way
time.
back. Yeah,
really
it was my
driving
first
manual.
time officially driving a manual. I've driven a few friends' cars, but nothing, really in depth.
Real road. What was that experience like?
It was a little intimidating getting on the highway, having semis pass you.
Yeah.
It's also a coupe, so you're very low to the ground.
Right.
But I mean, we got used to it. We got through it.
And so how long have you had the car since then? And how has driving a manual gotten any better, or is it just the same?
I believe it's been a month and a half now, and obviously it's gotten a lot better. I'm smoother with my shifts.
Yeah.
I've gotten red matching down. I'm still working on heel toe downshifting, but overall it has become like second nature to driving. It hasn't really been like a burden. I don't regret getting a manual or like over an automatic. So,
Cool.
I mean, yeah, it's been a good experience overall. I don't regret it. Yeah.
So, okay, so with that said, to the high school like demographic of people that are looking to get entry level fun car, right? Like something away from maybe whatever they're driving right now or their
2014
parents'
Nissan
cars.
Rogue.
Right. If you're looking to get away from that, what do you recommend? What are your tips when you're going into the car buying process?
So, when looking for something more fun and less practical, you're going to need to have some sacrifices. You're going to need to sacrifice depending on your budget. Obviously, there are fully fun cars with a very high price point.
Right.
But as a high schooler, you need to give up some things. With this car, I had to give up a lot of comfort. Like, when you sit in it, it's not a very comfortable car. It's a rough ride, and it's loud. You hear the road. And going at highway speeds, like, you're going to hear tire noise and different things like that.
Yeah.
So my advice to a high schooler would be, let go of that for now. Like, you'll have the comfort cars when you're 40 and 50,
Right.
middle age. So just have fun now, get the manual, get something harder to drive, more involved in the driving experience,
Yeah.
and don't look back.
All right. I like that.
Yeah, well, there you have it. That is some tips on how to buy a car that's equally fun for you and on a limited budget. So you guys can catch a quick review of the Hyundai Genesis Coupe made by Nishant later on our channel.
And you can catch a more in-depth review on this car on our other channel coming up soon. Details to follow.
Well, guys, that's all we have for today. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and watch our previous videos for more car culture. Also, you can catch the audio version of our podcast on Spotify and Anchor.fm. The link for that will be in the description. And stay tuned for next week's video. Bye.
Thank you.